Hello, and welcome to the Justice and Coffee podcast. The podcast where we talk justice over coffee with a special guest. And this week, our special guest is the broadcaster, communications consultant, and author, Genelle Aldred. Genelle has recently released a book called Communicate for Change, Creating Justice in a World of Bias, which is a timely reflection on the way we communicate with others in today's world, both corporately and personally. She poses the question, how do we advocate for justice in a world deeply divided by racial, gender, and class inequalities? Genelle encourages us to acknowledge our unconscious bias. We all have them. To opt for nuanced disagreement, and reminds us that nobody wins an argument. I really enjoyed this conversation, and it left me with much to consider. Hopefully, it will do the same for you. So quick, get yourself a brew, grab yourself a notepad and pen, and enjoy, hopefully, my conversation with Genelle Aldred. Hello, Genelle, and welcome to the Justice and Coffee podcast. How are you this fine morning?
I am very, very good this morning. The only unfortunate thing about this morning is I have not yet had a cup of coffee. That's the only unfortunate thing, but I do have a bag for your coffee here, so that will be what I'll be doing immediately after our conversation, but thank you for having me.
Now, I know there are people in the background because I heard you whisper to someone a few minutes ago. I think a good friend, which I can only imagine is who you're in company with, would make you a coffee whilst you're occupied with this podcast. And it is an essential part of the process, talking justice over coffee. But obviously, you've got a bag there.
Where's your coffee, though?
Got it here.
Oh, okay.
Got it here, mate.
Okay.
Yeah, you nearly did. You nearly did.
Thought I had you there.
Never. Never. Got it here. So Saturday morning, thank you for speaking to me on a Saturday morning. What does your Saturday morning normally look like? It's not exactly like this, I should imagine.
Normally, my Saturday mornings look like tidying up. And also, it depends. Some weeks I've recently taken up golf. So some Saturdays I will go to the golf course. And then otherwise, I try to exercise on a Saturday. But actually, I think one of the important things to do on a Saturday is to try and decompress from the week.
True. Yeah, true. Certainly if you're a Monday to Friday worker.
Yeah.
Saturday is a good day to enjoy yourself.
Just decompress and relax and just see friends. And but that's more in the evening than the mornings.
How are you finding golf?
I personally feel, and I don't know whether this is backed up by any stats, that I'm a natural. But, I have actually enjoyed it. And I think I was looking for a hobby that took me away from screens, because it's really strange that most of our hobbies, even reading, can sometimes involve a screen, or it's like documentaries or all of those things. And actually, I needed a hobby that took me outside. As a woman, I don't go running anymore, really, which is a shame. I don't run on the streets. That sounds bad, run on the streets, but I don't really run outside that much. It's kind of would be on a treadmill again in front of a screen. And so I was really looking for a hobby that would be active, but also in nature, because I love being outside. But there's not a lot of natural opportunities besides walking to go outside, and I'm quite competitive. And so I think I needed to get that little competitive itch scratched. And so golf seemed to tick a lot of boxes. And I also have some very golf mad friends who have been trying to get me into golf for years and years. And actually, so I decided to take up golf, and I really enjoy it. When you whack the ball, quite a good feeling.
You get a bit of nature, you get a bit of exercise, you get a bit of stress relief. Well, I don't know if you do, because I think every time you whack the ball, yes, and you connect and you get a nice and you see the ball fly off 200 yards. But for every time you do that and you scuff it 17 times or miss it or put it in the woods.
Yeah, very frustrating. But my golf clubs arrived this week, because I've just been, practicing using the ones at the golf club. So my golf clubs have arrived, my own ones, but I'm hoping to take them out maybe tomorrow or next week.
This sounds very New Year's resolution. Is it got anything to do with that?
No, I started it last November. I want to say November. And I started it previously 5 years ago, but then didn't keep it up. So yeah.
I'm the same. I had a set of golf clubs that my grandfather disposed of when I was away one day. I keep a lot of stuff at my grandparents'. I don't know if you do that. They always seem to have the spare space. I had a golf set there and he got rid of them one day without telling me. Thanks, Granddad. Anyway, so I wanted to, this is not golf cast. We're not going to talk anymore on the subject. I really, really wanted to make this happen in person. I was like, right, the chains of lockdown are beginning to come off. Like, let's get back in the studio because of the fact today we're talking about communication.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be lovely to have been able to do it in person? I want to use all my faculties so I can communicate as fully with you as possible rather than just in the ratio allowed from this Zoom box. How have you found as a communications professional, as a consultant dealing with Generation Zoom?
The interesting thing about being a newsreader is that you actually spend a lot of time reading into a camera with no one behind it. So for me, I think this is kind of an extension of something that I've done for a long time in terms of, most newsreaders are just conveying joyful, sad news to no one, in a sense. They're talking down the barrel of a camera and giving the news in that way. So I don't find it that disconcerting. I think and also, when you read the news, you can see your face in the screens around you. So I'm quite used to seeing myself on screen, but I've done a lot of training for people who are not used to that. And I think that has been interesting to try and free people from what they think is really restrictive. But in a sense, actually, it's a great way to keep communicating visually. And actually, it's a brilliant tool in lieu of being in person. But I think a lot of people find cameras restricting and therefore don't like being on Zoom because they don't like seeing themselves and hearing themselves back. But actually, I think if you can get over that, it's one way that technology has really opened up the world in a wonderful way if we can embrace it as such.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right. I think there's way more positives than negatives. The fact that I've been able to keep this podcast going. Originally, we just recorded in Soho radio studios. I really enjoyed the process. I'd go down, get a coffee, get a cake, meet the guests, get to know each other, record the podcast. But actually, it has enabled us to speak to people all over the world that I would normally go, oh, yeah, we'll just do English.
They're too far away.
It's too much hassle. There's a time difference and all these sort of things. So yes, pluses outweigh the minuses, but it's lovely. It is lovely to do it. In fact, it's become a luxury actually. To be enjoyed.
I think we'll appreciate it more.
I hope so. Yeah.
Because it was such an option on the table. We never thought about the day when maybe it wouldn't happen. So we put a lot of things off. You'd put off meeting your friends because it could happen anytime, theoretically. So it never happened. Whereas I think now we're going to be more mindful of the facts that sometimes it doesn't happen and can't happen outside of your control. So do it now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also wanted to have this podcast post reading your book.
Yes.
So when we spoke, we were connected through a friend. I didn't know you'd written this. Someone said, "Oh, you must speak to Genelle," and we had a little chat on the phone. And when we were chatting, I was bemoaning the fact I had this opportunity to write a book. And you went, "Oh, right, yeah, I've just written a book," and I didn't realize. Yes, you have written a book, one far more successful than I think mine could ever dream of being. This is great. This is amazing. So I'm not a natural page turning, sitting in a chair, sitting in one place reader. Audiobooks I eat for breakfast. And I know you've done this on audiobook, but I wanted to underline it and annotate it and sort of score it and make notes. So I'm like, no, let's do this once I've read it. I want to read it. And it's been good. I think you've addressed some really big issues and potentially contentious issues with a real natural clarity. It didn't feel overly preachy or written from the ivory tower. And I think you did it well. You paid a lot of attention to trying to display double perspectives on hot topics, and I think that was without being completely ambiguous and still saying, this is me, this is Genelle, this is written by a Black woman, these are my experiences. But there's enough effort there to show, I don't know, a certain empathy for other people's perspectives that I thought was really, really helpful for me to access, and anybody else that picks up. So how have you found the process of writing a book and then getting it out there and being known and associated with this text?
I think that's the nervousness, isn't it, with writing a book, actually, because like you say, now that is forever in a print form with my views suspended in the space and time, and views of which I hope will evolve as I evolve. So in a sense, there was a nervousness around putting my ideas down. And with writing a book, you go through a couple of iterations, and there was one iteration where I was like, I'm being so gentle, I don't think I'm making the point, because in trying to be kind of, okay, well, there's this view and there's this view, and I can, and trying to give that generosity, that there's a risk that actually, like you say, you don't say anything and it becomes very ambiguous of what am I trying to say. And so I kind of went through and said, okay, I think there might be a few slaps in there, but there's also many hugs. And so in that sense, that's what I didn't want to make it feel like it's just a book that's just punishing completely and all the things that people are doing wrong and everything else. I wanted to kind of look a bit beyond that as well, as to why we do it, because I think, when it comes to this space, we talk a lot about what people do, but not a lot about why they do it and what might be behind those behaviors. We want people to be who we think they should be idealistically, rather than actually who they are. And actually, I wanted to look at it from the perspective of not how should we be as a society, how are we? What is driving us? What's making us tick? So that's what I hoped to do in writing the book. Very vulnerable and risky. The vulnerability is all mine, but the risk is, of course, the publishers in taking a chance. And as any relationship, some of these relationships, we have a differing view of, what we think a book should be or what we think it should do. And I think the more honest that we are about the fact that there just are difficulties sometimes, this is what it is, the better. I found it a rewarding experience, but terrifying. And I wrote the book in about 6 weeks, the first draft.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because it was just kind of all in there. But then through the editing process, you refine the ideas, you refine them down. I would probably say the audiobook has a few on the fly edits where my thinking has evolved thus further. But no, yeah, it's been an interesting experience. And I do feel very fortunate to be able to put my view into the world, because I think the more views that go into the world is the richer of a world that, we are.
Agreed. Absolutely. And coming back to what you said at the start of your answer, I think that's one of the points you make in your book too. And I'm growing with peace on the subject of sometimes it's okay to have an unpopular opinion. We're so desperate not to offend. I know I've been like that. Oh, I want everyone to like me.
Yeah.
God forbid I actually have an opinion that might go contrary to others' thoughts and opinions too, and create, like, none of us want to create division. But it's okay to have an opinion. Opinions are formed from life experience. Well, a lot of the time anyway. But let's not get straight into that now. I want to come back to some of the things you said in your book and talk about personal communications. But you mentioned it briefly when you said about having experience as a newsreader, looking straight down the camera. So I will, of course, give you a spectacular introduction in this podcast. But you have spent your career as a broadcast journalist, as a newsreader, worked for BBC, ITV, ITN. You're a communications consultant. Now, what motivated you to take this lived experience, produce this book? Why now? Is it as a consequence of lockdown and the heightened issues around racial inequality, gender inequality, vaccine status, and global inequality, access to is it all of those things that have seemed to have added oxygen during COVID, and you thought, right, this is the time to get this thing out? Or has it started before COVID?
Yeah, it started way before, because I signed the publishing deal just as lockdown was beginning. So this, and kind of pushed the publishers to release it quite quickly. But no, yeah, I signed this book before this idea was here before lockdown happened. Actually, whilst I was writing the book, the murder of George Floyd happened. So that was happening whilst I was writing this book, not kind of, it didn't happen before I had the idea for the book. But I think in lockdown, it highlighted even more some of the things that I talk about. Really, why I decided to write it was after Prince Harry and Meghan got married, and there was all of this about the headlines, people saying these headlines are definitely racist, and some people saying these headlines are not racist, and me saying, well, I think the truth is yes and both, bit of complexity in the middle, but seeing that the conversation, it's like you had to pick a side, you had to decide that it was racist or that it was not racist, and she's just not a very nice person, despite most of us not actually knowing her personally. And so I think all of this kind of came together in me to think about, why do conversations get so drilled down so deeply, so entrenched, and feeling like you have to then defend everything that's happening on your side. So if you think these headlines are racist, and you have to say, well, then Meghan is good and true and pure and she's never done anything wrong, and if you say she's not a nice person, well, then it could never ever be racist. And both of those things can be true, cannot be true. And I just really wanted to explore the complexity inside of that. And doing comms, it's like I say to people, I need to know what you really want so I can tell you what to do. Because unless you might tell me, no, I don't want the fame and glory, I just want to do this thing, well, then your comms are not going to achieve ultimately what you really want. You have to be honest. And I just think sometimes actually in these conversations, there's not that, we don't allow that complex honesty, that you can be a good person who wants to save the world, but you might also want to be famous. And I think it's that kind of thing that's always going on in our thinking. And I just wanted to address that, because I don't think we can really see change until we address the complexity of how we are.
It's interesting what you say about pick a side. I think we must all acknowledge a real growth in tribalism, in the polarization of the left and the right, and the need to find your tribe, find your gang. I think I've seen that more on lockdown. We've obviously gone to the internet for connection. I'm locked up in my house. I can't meet people down the pub or at the football club or wherever else I normally do. So I'll go online. This is where I can voice my opinions, and this is where I can meet my people. And of course, we're becoming more aware of the way the internet works, and how algorithms work, and how clicks work, and how they funnel us into these silos where we can find people that agree with the same stuff as us. I work, so this amazingly, Genelle, you might not know, I'm sure you do, this is not my full-time job, either podcasting or running Blue Bear. It's in security. I work in security, and I work with a variety of mainly men, in the close protection world, and they have a variety of thoughts and opinions on the hot topics of the day. Some of them have some that I find really hard, and sometimes we have to spend a lot of time together, and I'll hear the podcast that they listen to and the sort of stuff that they feed on, and for me it's really tough. I'm like, oh, this is so toxic, this is so unhelpful, this is so driven by fear and hatred of the other, and but equally that's okay for them to listen to it and to find some truth in that. And I'm sure a lot of the things that I feed myself on, they'd find equally as unpalatable. So yeah, I feel really fortunate existing in these quite different worlds. I do get to see some very differing opinions. Now, you've used the word justice in the strapline of this book, creating justice in a world of bias. The book, Communicate for Change, creating justice in a world of bias. What does justice mean to you?
I think justice to me speaks to fairness, speaks to equality, and fairness and equality doesn't always mean the same thing for everyone, if that makes sense, in the sense of fairness isn't giving everyone exactly the same thing. I think justice is a world where everyone has what they need. Like a just world is a world where everyone has what they need, and where there is, to me, justice also speaks to love. in the sense of, loving your neighbor. To me, that is justice. Doing right by your neighbor is further justice. So that is probably how I would define justice. So in a just world, that's what I think would happen. Everyone would have what they need. People would operate with love, grace, understanding, equality, fairness. Yeah, that's what I think a just world would look like.
Sounds like a good place. When did you first become aware? If you think back to your perhaps childhood or at some stage of your life when you first became aware of that concept of justice that you've just described?
I guess I don't know if there was a moment really or a thing that happened. I think always aware that our family lived in a different way to other people in terms of going to church, for instance. So I think maybe what I was first aware of was difference more than injustice, or if that makes sense. I was probably first aware of difference, and then you become aware of how that difference, or how people treat or speak about that difference or treat you around that difference. I don't think I would have described it as injustice because our parents raised us quite confidently. So it wasn't that we felt that this made us worse than them, if that makes sense. So there's this really very strong, secure base. So I don't think I would have seen it as injustice. But then you start to read about, in our family, understanding my dad would would make us watch things like biographies and then autobiographies about like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And then you get this understanding of this thing, which you notice maybe in other ways, but is not impacting yourself, your well-being, your freedom, if that makes sense. So they're not really seeing it as a thing. It's just, can you believe that person said that, more than anything, as a young child? And so I think it's probably more an uncovering of the layers then as you become more and more exposed to the world with a more and more mature mind, that you then begin to see, oh, okay, well, this means this, and this is seen like this. Because every child, no matter how dysfunctional or functional their upbringing is, that is normal to them. So I don't think, if a child grows up in extreme poverty, they see extreme poverty as the way of the world, because that is their world. It's only upon being exposed to other people who have a lot more that you realize more the totality of what that means. But if a lot of people live like you, and those are the people that also, your worldview is that. And so I think when we talk about, it's not that children don't understand or don't see, but we don't understand the full picture. So I think that has been something that has just continued to uncover itself to me, and continues to uncover itself to me as I meet more and more people who are not like me in various different ways, and understanding the various different levels of injustice that there are. I think it's a journey of uncovering, probably more than a moment.
Yeah. And it's when we meet those people, as we grow our understanding of the world, is where we need to give each other permission to speak honestly, speak from a place of, well, this is how I feel based upon what I've read, what I've experienced, whatever. Because if I don't understand that, if you keep your thoughts to yourself, then how am I going to get to know you? Even if I think your thoughts are horrendous, I'm not going to understand you if they're veiled beneath like the everyday presentability. And one of the things you mentioned in your book, let me see, I bookmarked it because I wanted to quote it because I thought it was brilliant. Let me read from Genelle's book, page 33. It says, those who are more conciliatory should speak, but often don't. I dare to believe that this group of moderates is actually the quiet majority. I completely agree. Conversely, those who have extreme views tend to be very vocal. They know a lot about their narrow interests, and the more they know about a little, the larger their blind spots. Many of these determined commentators seldom allow any space for the notion that they might be wrong. And you're right, you go on to expand upon that point, but that's certainly been my experience as well with the more contentious issues. Let's take the vaccine as one of them. I don't want to get out there and start taking my opinion and saying, well, listen, guys, let's look at the data. surely this is, in my opinion, on the whole, from a public health point of view, this is the right thing to do to vaccinate as many people as possible to reduce the impact on the healthcare system, etc. All the well-known rationale behind why we're doing this, for me, I have no issue with. I can understand, so I can empathize with those people who have issues with the speed in which the vaccine was produced. I can have, I empathize with those people that are concerned that, hey, well, I'm healthy. Why should I be filling my body with a drug? I can understand with people that say, I don't like that there are pharmaceutical companies making a great profit from this. I can empathize with people that say, I don't like that my freedom to congregate, my freedom to travel, my freedom to leave my house has been infringed upon, and they consider tyranny is a word that's been used like never before in the last few years. I feel like it's a tyrannical rule of all of these different nations. So I can empathize with those subjects. I don't necessarily agree, but I can get it. I get it. What I don't get is when it gets to the point that this is a complex, well-planned, international, multinational conspiracy to make very few people super rich and all this. And it seems to, for me, run out of gas when it starts going in that direction. But people should be allowed to express their opinions, right? And then one of the things, once again, I want to put this off and try and put some structure on this, because we could talk all day about these topics. But it's like, how do I come into that conversation and not, like I've just said, you know what, I'm going to keep my thoughts to myself because I don't want to end up in an argument.
Well, sometimes it's wise to not end up in an argument, honestly. And that's one thing. I think sometimes I do think more people should engage, but I think engage when it's going to be fruitful. I think the thing that I sometimes try to do is ask questions. So, okay, so where did you get that information? Oh, why do you trust that information from where you got it from? Okay, why do you trust that information more than the other information? And so I think for me, it is sometimes more about asking questions than it is about telling people. And I think what happens is people say things like, you must be stupid to believe in these, and a conversation like that is just like an absolute non-starter. There's nowhere good a conversation goes from that kind of putting on of someone, that kind of opinion. But I think that's what people do because we feel frustrated and we want to make the point very strongly that we think that that's ridiculous. But obviously that person doesn't think it's ridiculous. They think it's rational and reasonable. So you can't tell them, whilst they think they're rational and reasonable, that they're an idiot, and then think that they're going to go, oh yeah, I am an idiot. Maybe it's all wrong. Actually, that is more likely to push them further into their argument and wonder, why are you upholding this, tyrannical worldwide conspiracy of movement and flight, And so I think in that sense, to have that conversation, well, it always has to be, I think, about questions rather than about statements, and statements about other people's appraisal of the information. And I think also sometimes having to recognize that we can have all the same information and we can come to a different conclusion. And being different human beings as we are, that is normal and can happen. I think sometimes people become exasperated that other people just don't see it their way. We're all different. And I try not to always feel too exasperated. Like you say, to understand, I can understand how you got there. I can understand why it does look like a mass conspiracy. I don't think it is, but you think it is. And I'm just really interested in how you came to that conclusion. So for me, it's more about asking questions, but I think a lot of people actually pronounce statements, which is highly ineffective.
Yeah. Nail your colours to the mast. Right, this is who I am. Who are you? Oh, you're wearing that colour. I'm wearing this colour, and neither the twine.
You're an idiot. You're not wearing red. So yeah, so I think it's about moving it away from that kind of territory into more the questioning.
I think time has got something to do with it too, in respect to how much time we allot to these conversations, right? Because to have that conversation you just described, well, okay, let's unpack this. I've traveled before, I've had vaccines before, we've engaged with medication before since we were born, etc., etc. That's going to take time, and that person will have a counter argument for each of those points, etc. So you could lose an hour where it'd be far easier to go, no, well, I think you're wrong and I'm right, so let's just not talk about it. Right? I think that's That's
and I think that's why we are where we are,
mm,
because every conversation takes emotional capacity.
mm,
Even fun conversations take emotional capacity. And realistically, I think some of us are probably overstretched in how many relationships we try to do deeply. And so actually don't have that time because we're interacting really with people, or we have the emotional capacity to interact with that many people on a very shallow basis. So there isn't that depth there to be able to have that conversation. And I think that's probably the reality of how most people's social circles probably quite wide and shallow. We would never want to call them shallow because we feel, we no, they're not shallow, but a lot of relationships that we have are shallow. It's the occasional message every now and again, the occasional meal. The depth is probably not there to discuss something thorny over time. And the relationship is more likely to crack and break than it is to survive a tough conversation about something you don't agree on. And I know that is true in my own life. There are some relationships that have not survived lockdown. And that is down to when the chips are really down, it's time to really have that conversation. The depth's not there. Not there. And the emotional capacity, and where there's no depth and no emotional capacity, there's not a lot of will to keep it going. And I think, these are things, if we were all more honest about relationships, we would probably acknowledge and just to face into.
Yeah, I think you've landed on something really, really, really interesting there in regards to our capacity to have meaningful relationships. I want to do a pitch change, and I want to talk, if I can, with you a little bit about. So we're talking a little bit about interpersonal relationships there. I want to ask you a few questions from a corporate point of view. Yeah. So for people that work in business, charities, churches, NGOs, at an organizational level. I know you're a consultant. I love a freebie. So by having sent you a bag of coffee and in exchange for that, I get an hour of your time. I'm going to squeeze it for as much value as I can get. So we've seen it, haven't we? We've seen it. We've seen organizations get it wrong. We will also have seen recently, because I've heard you talk about it really, really humorously on other podcasts, about like this knee-jerk response to like, oh, there's this new movement, Black Lives Matter or gender equality or whatever, and big brand names just do a very arguably, questionably superficial response to it, without it being particularly backed up in the way their organizations exist. But superficially, we need to do something. We need to respond to this. There's a call on us. How do we address these issues fairly without being tokenistic and shallow and superficial and all of those other things that we see so often?
The first thing I think is the not rushing. People like moths to the flame. They can't wait. And then as they get close to the flame, they realize this is actually hot. Okay, I'm burning. So I think there is something in that about, we really do need to reflect. And I think it's sometimes in the rush to do things. I remember, and I've spoken about, the black squares when people were posting them. I actually took the apps off my phone that day because the pressure, even as a black person, to post this solidarity. And there was just something in me that was like, this is deeply performative, and especially at the speed at which people are doing it. And I get that people wanted to show something, but I think we made posting a black square mean more than it actually did. So the non-posting of it meant more than it actually did. And so it was kind of like people are between a rock and a hard place, because we want to see that brands are engaged in these issues. So if they don't post it, it's like they're not engaged. But then as a brand, to me, your responsibility behind that posting and behind that day would have been to really actually take some time to reflect and come back with something meaningful. And the fact that people posted their black square, did business as usual, means this was nothing more than a performative gesture. We've very much seen that is what this is. For me, I think the very first thing when you as a team are deciding, okay, what should we do about this issue? First of all, look around the table. Are these people, are there women? Is there ethnic diversity? You want to rush to this subject, but look around just your top tables. Who's here? because that's the first injustice in that sense, that you are trying to tackle something without actually bringing in the very people who are affected by the problem. And that's the first, you're never going to come up with a good solution for it. You're just not. Try as we may, 6 rich friends around a table talking about how to solve world poverty without actually speaking to someone who lives in poverty is disingenuous. You're saying what you think they need from your position because of the things that you have, that you find necessity to you, are the things that now you think they need to have as a necessity for them. And you're going to do that for them, not knowing whether that's what they actually want, need, desire, are looking for. And so I think in that sense, that's the thing that people first need to do. Look around your tables, who's here. And if the relevant people are not in the room, ensure that they come into the room, and not in a way of kind of, okay, well, we're going to help you by allowing you to come in the room, but know that your room benefits from them being in there. And the thing that you're about to do benefits from them being in the room, and not just about, diversity in the room, but the freedom for them to think in their own way, and the freedom and the voice to speak up for that diversity that they represent, or else it's just assimilation. And I think in these moments, really what people want is just for it to all go away. That's what they really want. So they want to do what they need to do and then return to business as usual. And so that's the second thing. Resist that urge just to return to business as usual. Once you've made a stand, don't just go back to what you were doing before. Choose to do something different and hold yourself accountable to doing something different. And so I think these are the kinds of things that matter when these moments matter. Is yes, if you want to rush to prove, do, but it needs to be backed up by something, or else I would always say just don't do it.
In respect to what you've mentioned about the diversity in your boardroom or in your teams, a common argument that you'll hear is in reference to meritocracy. Well, surely the people that are in that boardroom are there as a consequence of their skills and ability, not as a political movement to have more women on the board or more people of different ethnicities on the board. The counter argument to that is, well, what are we judging at, or what is this meritocracy coming from? Like where who calls, where are those parameters? Where are those measurements being designed from, which says you're more capable than this person, you've been to this university, or what did that person have the chance of getting to that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Because it is such a, I definitely read it at some point in your book, is where are we taking these standards from? Because it doesn't really work like that. Help me unpack that, would you?
A meritocracy has never existed anywhere. I just don't even believe it exists. And if it does exist, it's a meritocracy for a particular thing. And let's be honest, most of these goals have been for united thinking, homogenous thinking. That's the goal. They want everyone on board to be on board, and they don't want dissenting voices. So they pick people who are like them, who are not going to dissent and who are going to say yes. You look at boards like this all the time. This is what people want. They want to get a particular thing done, and they surround themselves with the people that they think are going to be the path of least resistance to get that thing done. Not many people do I know pick their board based on how combative they are with them. I have not seen that. Because most people, we enjoy being challenged up to a point of where our comfortability is, myself included. So, I'm not pointing fingers here at anyone else. I'm just talking about the human way. And if there has been affirmative action, well, it's been for white men for the longest time. Like, that has been the affirmative action. And many people have got their roles by being the same as, not being different. And now there is a push for difference, and people find that uncomfortable because people sense a loss of their own opportunity. And that's naturally human, to sense your loss of opportunity. And what does this change if we start saying, okay, well, actually, what we don't have here is a meritocracy? What does that then mean about me? What do I have to admit about myself? Maybe I wouldn't be as far as I am if I were a Black woman, if I were a Chinese man. All of a sudden, you have to start asking yourself some very hard questions about really, what are my skills and talents? How good am I? No one wants to ask themselves those questions. It's not normal. It's a loss. And And so I think in terms of where do we get these standards from, it's just the standard of the person holding the most power in the place. And they are measuring up everyone against that measurement of basically themselves, which is why most hires, I saw it on Twitter the other day, I don't know who to credit who said this, but instead of talking about diversity hires, you should ask, is this a homogenous hire? So are we doing a diversity hire? Are we doing a homogenous hire today? Because really that's what we're kind of leaning into. But the thing that I also think is also true is you can't just say that because there's 12 white men in a room, there's no diversity of thought. That's not true. There will be diversity of thought, but there's not enough difference to make a difference where it counts. And that's what I think we need to be honest about. So we can't just say, well, there's no diversity of thought in there. Those 12 people don't think the same. They don't have the same upbringing, the same life, the same experiences. No. So we can't say that to be true. What we can say is with more difference of women, of different ethnicities, of different, disabilities, when we push that, what we'll get is much richer and will more likely reflect our audience back to itself in a better way.
From my perspective, we spoke about it before when we first chatted. I want to be really transparent and open to criticism, and I feel really blessed that I feel fortunate. I haven't received a great deal of trolling, but I have
just a little bit,
a tiny bit. So I think about what you're saying. So the way the Blue Bear is structured, if I could be so naughty in using us as an example and getting your advice, but we don't have a board we have a board of trustees. We've set up a charity, and I have a Dominican board of trustees in the Dominican. But we're not a big team of people. Largely, it's driven by volunteers and by my efforts in my spare time. And I think about that. I do think about that. And then you look at the coffee industry and you think, well, we're buying coffee. Our product of choice comes from the global south, and it's largely enjoyed by middle-class people in the UK. And I think about, like, how can we do this narrative better? And then we've got the narrative of where this whole thing started, which was an experience I had in the Dominican Republic with a trafficked child, of many trafficked children, and wanting to create a teddy bear fund that became a coffee business so we could create equity to support survivors. I've even looked at changing the wording on the website from caring for survivors to empowering survivors, so the message isn't looking downwards. So sometimes it's semantics and sometimes it's deeper than that. But I'm so desperate, Genelle, to get this right, that I can't change my ethnicity, my gender, my class, any of those things. I don't want to let any of those things prevent me doing my best around helping people and using my life to help people who need support. And I don't want to be intimidated by getting it wrong. So I'll just do nothing. You know what? The easiest thing is I'll just keep myself to myself. I won't engage in that sphere, because God forbid people could call me a white savior and all these things. But I do want to be cognizant of those issues. I don't want to be ignorant to them. I want to get it right, or as close to right as I possibly can. And then when we disagree on an issue, I need to know that I've got the rationale to go, well, this is why I do it. And I might have got that wrong, but it's meant with the best of intentions, and I'm learning, and please, be human with me. So it's for me, it's a difficult one. And the main thing, I think, is listening from this for me, and please speak into it. But I want to have my ears open. I want to know if I'm suddenly using a term that is so old fashioned, like, oh, we don't use that term anymore. Oh, okay. But also, like, my thinking is not old school. It's not repeating an unhelpful narrative of the white West saving people of color in the developing world. How do we change that? I read as many books as I can. I listen to as many podcasts, but I don't know. What advice do you have for me?
I mean, some of the things that I think about, and having been in and around the charity sector, is that one, I think a lot of people in the charity sector in the West are very uncomfortable with Black people who live in the West. We think very much about white people in the West helping the global South. Well, there's also Black people and brown people in the West of means, have things, also doing the same. So that's the first thing that I feel like the charity sector needs to course correct in that thinking, because terms like white savior in a sense are not wrong, but it's kind of, even in this country, because the charity sector is so white, it's almost like they forget that there are Black people who have means. And so a lot of the time what goes on in these spaces, in these conversations, is the conflation of being Black or brown and being poor. So when me walks into a charity, everyone doesn't know what to do. Because in a sense, in their boxes of how people are, white people have and Black people don't. And that is the first thing that I think we need to adjust the sails of here on this end of things, is want to adjust those sails. So it would actually be very easy to have a person of color on boards and a person of color working for you, because that is actually very possible in our reality. But it's almost kind of like that's not a reality. But the reason why a lot of Black and brown people in this country are not attracted to those roles is because of the way white people are in those spaces. So they don't want to work there because it is the savior thing. And they're almost looking at you with that same kind of compassion as they're looking at someone who lives in a very, very, very different circumstance and wondering if you need help, like those people need help. So I think there's that first thing about adjusting that view of self and of the context of where we are. It's not hard to attract people if your company is attractive to work for. That's the bottom line. And so if you cannot attract any people of color and you live in a city like London, you have to ask yourself some questions, because, people of color are everywhere, very high percentage. If you live somewhere else, very different. And I think, we have to also look at that proportionality. And then I think the other thing is, it is about thinking, when we're talking about empowering, or whether we're talking about caring, whether we're talking about any of these things, how much are we seeing these other people as equal? Because that's the other thing. It's always a hand down, isn't it? I know that going on my trip, and I'm sure you feel the same, is how much richness we take, actually, of the sense of spirit, the sense of determination, the sense of self, the agency these people have, the dignity they have, the pride they have in who they are, in their country, in the things that they can grow, and the land, and all of these things. They have all of this pride, and then we tell them, oh, no, you're poor. Oh, didn't you? Oh, no, yeah, no, you're in poverty. You didn't know. Okay, well, I'm alerting you to this. And I really think we need to think about what are we meaning? What are we talking about? What are we talking to people about? How are we overexposing them to one element of themselves and underexposing them to the richness that they have in other elements? And a lot of the richness that we then take away to mine for a new gratitude for all that we have. I think we just need to look at the fact this is a very complex relationship in which the power dynamics are unbalanced because we have made it so, because we have made ourselves the givers. There are children trafficked in this country. What for them? And so I think it's not about not doing or not being, but I think it's about, we need to reimagine what charity means, in the sense of, what are we saying we're doing when we're doing it? Reimagine the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, reimagine the stories we tell other people about themselves, to really begin to get a complex understanding of the fact that, like the scenario I use in my book, if I don't have lunch money today and you give me £5, did you save my life? No. You gave me £5 for my lunch today. It's helped me out of a hole. Should I be grateful? Yes. Do you then have some kind of, look what I've done for Genelle. Like I gave her £5 for lunch. Genelle should be grateful to me because we're not for me. And here I'm going to take a picture of Genelle and I'm going to post it and say, look what I did. I bought someone lunch today. Listen, I'm not saying don't take the picture. Don't be glad you did it. But I'm saying we all just need to think a little bit more deeply about what it all means and how we're truly viewing people, and whether we're truly viewing them as equal or as projects to be helped, because that's the problem. The problem is not that we're helping people. The problem is the attachment we put to it for us and for them in the helping, and the way that we talk about it. That's the problem. So do I have a concrete answer today? Probably not. But what I am saying is, I think especially for those who work in that sector, it's a lot of deep self-examination about what you're doing and why, and how you really view the people that you say you want to help. How do you really view them? Are they equals? Are they projects?
Yeah, and I think you have to do it over and over and over again, don't you? You have to keep checking yourself at multiple points. Okay, what's my motivation behind this? Could the, is this right? Am I okay with this? Should I share this with other people and get their thoughts first before we post? And it's easier just to throw content out there and messaging out there without thinking, because we know it's for the right place,
Yeah.
but actually we haven't truly, like you say, really examined it.
And I think, as I say in the book, I think especially in the charity sector space, and I'm using this in general, people think that the ends justifies the means. And I don't believe that to always be true. So like you said, people throw content at the wall because they say, well, because we're doing it for the right reasons.
I think it's a really complicated issue, that particular, if we were to take one issue, is charity, how we do charity well and better, and all those things. It was definitely something, I'm sure you do talk on boards and like conferences and stuff like that, but that sort of thing I'd love to spend more time thinking about. One of the things that we've set up in the Dominican is a Dominican board of trustees, and what I desperately want is for the Dominican board to develop an ability to raise capital from that country. I know the country very well. There are a lot of rich people in the Dominican Republic. Part of the battle is the awareness of this issue of the exploitation of children in the country, and it's far better that message being communicated by Dominicans about a Dominican issue than by me. And so that's something we've intentionally done, but something that's slightly nuanced is what they said in the early days. When we said, so I said, well, I will have nothing to do it. I'll be in the background. I want to support you. They said, no, we want your presence. We want your involvement, because here, your presence gives greater credibility to this organization on the basis there's so much endemic corruption in the charitable sector over here. Your presence gives more legitimacy to it. And you think, well, you don't hear that message very often. And I wasn't expecting that. I was trying, like I was saying, trying to get it right. But
both things can be true in that sense. Do you know what I mean? And it is true. It's true in all things. You want to do something, your mom tells you to do it, you don't do it. Someone else tells you to do it, you do it. Why? Because you're very familiar with your mom. So familiarity breeds contempt. True. But for me, it's like, okay, well, where's the Dominican diaspora in this country that could be a bridge? I'm not saying that you haven't interacted with them, but where's the Dominican diaspora in this country that could be a bridge for you with this organization, could help you to think about the story? And I think that's what people often don't do. They don't use the people in their context who actually are very much like them, but have the understanding also of home. And so I think, I remember getting into a conversation with my friends, and, when the COVID and lockdown, they're trying to make their teams more diverse, but they had a hiring freeze, and, so they couldn't promote people internally to leadership, people of color. But my question was, well, that's because for too long you haven't hired any. So this is, you look at it as it's not a today problem. It's a problem of the way you've always been doing it, which has been highlighted today by the need to do something very different, which you now cannot do because you don't have those people in the organization. And so I think sometimes that's what we think, well, what can I do? The people are all around, but we just don't view them in that way, as that they would be as helpful as they can be to us in that context.
No, it's really, really interesting points, certainly for me to think about. When you look for examples of best practice, I don't know if you've heard of something called the Radiade Awards. Have you heard of this? It's really funny, actually. If you Google it, it's I think it's a Dutch organization, or it might be it might be from Norway, but they celebrate the best fundraising videos in the charitable sector and the least helpful, and really sort of poke fun.
Oh yeah, I think I've seen the award outcomes, but I didn't know the name. But yeah,
it's good. I don't know what it's got to do with radiators. It's like the rusty radiator in the gold. I have no idea, but it's good. It's really good, and I enjoy watching the two. Why is this a really unhelpful video of a poor kid in the Sudan looking sad with flies on his face? and then why is this a helpful video, the way they've totally reframed this message. And but it takes it, you've got to be clever, you know. It's you can do, like you said, the path of least resistance. It's easy to do this. Sad faces generate charitable donations, but actually that messaging can be far more empowering and more effective if it's done right. But it's not always easy. You mentioned your father. I think you might have mentioned him in this talk already, but you do talk about him lots in books and in conversations. He's obviously had a big impact on your life. He was a bishop, wasn't he? And is he still a bishop?
Well, he's not in pastoral work, so would still have the title, but not the job, if that makes sense. None of the hard work to go with it. He's retired now.
Oh, he's retired. Very good. But I want to ask, and I suspect it's the case, did he provide you with really positive examples of communicating around these difficult, hot, potentially contentious and divisive topics?
Oh yeah, I've learned so much of my communication style from my dad and my mom. So much of it. But my dad is like an antagonist. He is someone who, you know, dog with a bone, the right thing to do, tries to always do the right thing, always advocates loudly and strongly for the right thing to do. You know, I've had that as an example in all of my life, that if you see something going wrong, you don't just stand there, you be the one to stand up. I remember I was in this WhatsApp group and I was like, oh, you know, there's a few things that I think are not like, yeah. And my dad said, well, if you're staying in the group and you're not saying anything, then you're part of the problem, you know. So I've very much grown up with that kind of thing of, it is your responsibility where you see injustice to speak up, say something, do something, act, move. Don't just stay there and just collect the spoils for the status quo. And I have very much taken that on, you know, myself. His communication of it, my dad has always been a very good communicator because he is also an avid reader. He's a doctor of philosophy and theology. And so, you know, he's always been the wordsmith and always saying it in such a certain of a way. And then my mother is like one of those smiling assassins who will who can cut you to the quick very nicely and very graciously. I've not always managed to be as gracious as my mother, but I learned a lot from the way that they do things with precision, with thought, but in the end to achieve something. And you will not always personally win from it, but it will be a win for the right thing. And very much that has been how my parents have operated in their own lives and what I've seen. So yeah, that's definitely had a big impact on me.
Yeah, I can see it imbued in your work and in everything you produce. It's great that you've had those influences on your life, that freedom to speak your mind as well, which many of us take a long time to gather the courage to do so. Many of us never achieve it either. So that's an amazing blessing. Zoning in from the corporate back to the personal, and I'm thinking about the sort of listeners to this podcast. A lot of them are engaged with the charitable sector. A lot of them would consider themselves engaged with the subject of justice. There's a million podcasts to listen to. Why would they listen to this? Because they care about justice. And I think of the term, because I've got friends that couldn't care less, and they often send me pictures of Transformers with social justice warrior like memes to sort of tease me. It's almost become a pejorative term to be social justice warrior. It's become how do we address those things? One of the things you say is how do we recognize our biases? I'm not racist. I have no bias. I'm colorblind. All this. No, that's rubbish.
That's rubbish.
We all have them, right?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, I guess when it comes to thinking about how do we address our biases, I think just be honest that you're a human being with bias and everyone has them. And the more we try to pretend that we don't have them is the more we try to cover them up. Human beings are leaky, but other people will see it, but they will not trust you. And that is why I think the justice sector has a bad name, because a lot of people who want to seek justice and advocate very loudly, this is what they want to do, are themselves unjust in some ways. And it can be seen. So people take this kind of double standard. And so I think the thing I'm kind of saying is, look, no one can be passionate about everything. No one can carry every cause in their heart. So stop pretending that you can and that you do. And, I remember someone once calling me out and saying, you need to care about this. And I said, I will never care about this as deeply as you do. I can learn more about it, but actually I'm very passionate about this thing. And you probably will never care about this thing as much as I do. And we have to both be okay with that. But I think we kind of live in a world where we jockey people to be as passionate about and as care as deeply and fight for the things that we would. And it comes down to this thing again. Look, if we all look after the patch of grass where we see the injustice and we tend to that, we'll have a very pretty garden. But if we are all forced to stand on one little patch of land and we all tend to this, nothing changes apart from this one patch of land, which doesn't make a difference for everyone. And so therefore people feel nothing's been done. So I think people in the justice sector need to have that self-examination and not just kind of, well, I'm just doing my best, because you know what, sometimes I do my best and sometimes my best is not good enough. And that is the reality of the situation. Sometimes my best is not good enough, but it's true that it is my best. So I think we need to think sometimes, yes, I want to be involved in this work, but have I looked at myself deeply enough? Should I be involved in this work? Do I need to go away and think about some things before I become more vocal about my views? Because actually there are some scores within myself that are unsettled. Do I need to settle those scores? Do I need to come to the truth of where I do have biases? You can't just be affronted that someone called you racist, but yet not address anything that might be going on in you that might present that way to someone else. I'm a deeply flawed human being. I've said it before, Hillary Clinton says, some people say I'm the best person I've ever met, and some people say I'm the worst, and they're both right. And I think that is true for most humans. We're nice to the people we like, and we're not as nice to people that we don't like. This is very normal. But when we pretend, no, I don't do that, all of a sudden you become disingenuous. No one's going to trust anything you say, because we all know that to be a lie. I don't have any racism in me. Most human beings have a preference for people that look like them. This is just a biological fact. So somehow you want me to believe that you are defying all the laws of science and biology by yourself. If you try and sell me that untruth, I believe you to tell untruths and to tell lies. So I think the reason why the sector has a bad rap is because of that. So I think it's for people to not just kind of say, well, I just try my best and I can only do what I can do, but to actually really take some time to take that self-examination about what they're doing and why, and to really consider it and whether it's a good place for them to be doing work, or if there is more work on oneself to do. No one's ever going to be perfect, but if you pretend it's not there at all, then that's a big problem.
Very interesting. I always go back over these podcasts to look for like a 1-minute excerpt to share on our socials, or look for a title. And I think the title, this one, I'm going to put "Human Beings Are Leaky" by Genelle Aldred.
It's what it's true. And we are what as a man thinks, so he is. Out of the heart the mouth speaks. Whatever is in your heart will come out. And so when really you do have a bias, or you do feel that white people are superior and you don't want to recognize that, I tell you, it will come out in the things that you say, in the people you hire, in the people you don't hire, in the people you trust, in the people you don't trust, in the people you choose not to socialize with, because there's a more better, more you way. It will come out and people won't trust you.
Another quote that you referenced there was that I think was really good. You give this example of your friend complaining about being left-handed, and every time she goes through the tube, so this is such pain because I'm left-handed and I have to change my hand to use my pass to scan into the tube because it's made for right-handed people. And you're like, like, I can't be that upset about.
But when she said it, it just never occurred to me. Never in a million years would I have thought of that myself. Never.
But your quote is, which I think is absolutely spot on: when we aren't affected by a problem, we have no investment in solving it, right? So and it's so true. I got into this conversation with my friend recently, sort of mid Black Lives Matter, Sever Everard, very anti-police. Me being an ex-police officer, there's a lot of anti-police feelings, sentiment, politically, on the news and in culture at the time. This is Joe. He's a friend of mine. He's a black man. We've spoken, we've been best friends since we were sort of 16 years old at college, and his partner is black, and he wanted to talk about it with me. Like, oh, I need to talk about this because I've been defending the police based on you, based on my relationship with you. And like you talked earlier on about monolithic, homogenous thinking, the police are bad or based on a couple of incidents or whatever. And that's condensing this organization, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-gender organization. I mean, the Met's got over the biggest employer in the UK, 32,000 officers, whatever, into one thing, one representation, and how unhelpful that is. And what I thought was interesting is when I get close, I often withdraw to speaking out. And hey, this isn't fair because it's because suddenly I'm impacted.
Because
right?
That's you. They're talking about you. That's why.
Exactly. And suddenly I want to respond.
For all
these other topics,
I want to defend. You want to defend the part of you that could be seen as that. Yes. And we just all have to recognize that this is what we do. This is very human. When we feel threatened, we defend, we react, we antagonize, we push, we poke, because that is the human way.
Yeah. That's absolutely the sort of conclusion that we came to in this conversation. It's like, I only speak up when I feel like I'm being attacked, when there's so many other opportunities to engage. But it's only because I'm being infringed. I don't like this.
And I think this is the human way. Let's all accept we are human. We are complex. Other people are human. Other people are complex. Within that complexity, there will be areas of overlap for joy, areas of overlap for the opposite of joy, the opposite of that. And that actually we just have to meet people where they are. We need to look at our institutions. We need to look at, why it's harmful that people see it that way, both internally and externally. What does that mean for society? But actually, where do they need to change and not be defensive? I've got the battery on my laptop was dying. But I was on Newsnight the other day, talking about baby loss and talking about midwives. And the reality for me is that midwives carry bias like everybody else. But when we make an industry almost, we can't say that, you can't say they're racist. I'm not saying they're racist. I'm saying that everyone has bias, and that means it will affect someone's outcomes. Same with the police. So when we're dealing with these big institutions that have a lot of power and control over other people, it is really important that we recognize that, yes, it might only be one or two, but that can have massive consequences for so many people in so many ways because of the power they hold. And so when we have these conversations and when we want to defend, and, once talked about the police and someone got in my DMs and, his wife was crying because she's a police officer. And I was like, mate, it's like, what if someone said something about ministers and priests and your dad? I said, listen, my dad would be the first one to be out there shouting for justice, as would I, because it matters not to me that my dad is part of that. What matters to me is actually people are being harmed and hurt. That's my concern. When we defend sometimes the indefensible, we're not thinking about the people who are actually really affected by this in multiple ways. And so I think that's always the other thing that I just try to consider.
I've got one last question for you, since your battery
before my laptop dies.
about to die. Okay, I've got to pick between two of these. One, and you can have either one. One of them is, if you could change the world in one way, what would it be? Your second option, Genelle, is what makes you angry about the world and what gives you hope. So it's kind of a double header. Which of those two? If you could change the world in one way, or what makes you angry, what gives you hope?
I'm going to return them both. If I could change the world in one way, I would give everyone a good self-esteem, because I think that would be one quick way to make the world a better place. If you love yourself, you can love others. If you cannot love yourself, you cannot love others. So that would be one quick hit for me. And then I think what makes me angry about the world is just seeing vulnerable people unprotected. I believe everyone has a voice. I don't believe in voice for the voiceless, but I do think that sometimes we choose to ignore certain voices and we don't allow them a say. And I think I feel especially strongly about that when it's children, children going hungry, children being abused, children, all of those things. And also elderly people in that same breath. I just think the vulnerable a society should be judged by how they care for the vulnerable among them. And I would say that in this country at the moment, I would say we're not doing a very good job. And that makes me angry that some children go hungry. What gives me hope is that I think there are enough people who do want to change the world. And I also think that increasingly a lot of those people who do want to change the world are now having these complex communications with each other, with others, are thinking more deeply about how they are, their biases, their baggage. And that gives me hope, because it means that actually people are considering, okay, we do want to do good, but how can we do it better?
Lovely, beautifully put, well staggered, ended on a positive note. Genelle, for people who are listening and thought, this woman's talking sense, I want to find out more about her. Where can we send them?
So I'm on, all the social media channels, sometimes arguing, sometimes remembering not to argue because I have written this book. So you can find me there at Genelle Aldred. Also, my book's available at all good bookstores, or can be ordered into, and bad ones that don't do the best for the planet, but we still use them. And so all of those bookstores, and also my book is now on Audible. So if you like to listen to it, then I would say, it's on there to listen to as well. So yeah.
Thank you for giving me your Saturday morning. You're so generous, so very kind. It's been great to talk. Left me with lots to think about too. Have a wonderful weekend, Genelle. And let's stay in touch. Can we be friends?
Yes. We can be friends. I'm benevolent. No, joking. Yeah, we can be friends. Thank you so much for having me. I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation.
Back with a bang. Starting the new year on the Justice and Coffee podcast, the way we mean to continue. Thank you, Genelle. If you haven't done it yet, could I ask you to rate and review this podcast on whichever hosting platform you use? I saw the other day that somebody had actually given us a 3-star review. 3 stars! So I looked at the name of our reviewer, and it just so happened to be my mother, who, when questioned, explained she thought she'd pressed the 5-star button. Oh yeah. So we need lots more 5 stars to improve the average overall rating. Thanks to Mum. This podcast was produced by Blue Bear Coffee Company. You can find out more by going to our website at bluebearcoffee.com or follow us on social media at Blue Bear Coffee Co. We look forward to having you with us for the rest of the year on the Justice and Coffee podcast. Thank you for listening today. Peace.